This is someone writing out their thoughts, but it would be a lie to say that I would like some of what I am writing here to go unheard, or worse, misunderstood. Although you could say that this is something of a diary, made at first as a way of organizing my thoughts, I think my intentions have changed. I would like those of you listening out there to hear the things I'm writing and saying, and to understand them. A want of attention, to be sure, but I think the attention I seek is not only an ends unto itself, and the words I want understood would give me no direct gain, were what they imply to be agreed with. Furthermore, this is not an academic undertaking, full of citation and research. These are observations, and the thoughts and feelings that come from them. In formal terms, it's groundless and unsubstantiated. None of these reasons excuse this thing from critique, criticism, comment. I only mean to say that I make this thing out of conviction, and I hope that, if you would not sympathize with me, at least you could empathize with me. To give a taste of what's to come, I see a lot of conflict, suffering, and emptiness that arises from a desire to avoid conflict, suffering, and emptiness. I cannot say that this is a universal human experience because I couldn't know. I would say that this phenomenon is so widespread as to be pandemic, but because of its frequency, not only across place but also across time, I am more inclined to say that it is a normal thing. I know the word normal carries so much baggage, and so I say with precaution that normal does not mean desirable, acceptable, or standard. I would like to say that the thing I just did, of being careful in my expression of what I meant by a particular word, it's something I find myself doing often, because many seem inclined to understand someone else's message and intent on not only what they literally said and meant, but also on what they did not say and mean. I try to select my words carefully. For instance, to avoid conflating the meanings of good with right, correct, just, fine, and so on. Even so, there are times when all the precaution in the world is for naught. This is an unfortunate inevitability, but we can always do well to prevent as much understanding as possible. You, too, might find benefit in doing something similar, but please, if you do find any cause for critique or criticism, please do so. It never hurts to go over your work once more. I'm already doing so what's the difference? All in the spirit of understanding, or, rather, to be understood and avoid misunderstanding. With that introduction, let us begin. Self-awareness. The understanding of the concept, the understanding of the word, the frequency in which the word is thrown around in discussion and used in its adjective form. It seems that all of these things concerning the subject of self-awareness are floating around. That is not to say that earnest attempts at expressing thoughts and feelings about the subject of self-awareness have not been made or are not being made, for there have been and are many, and many are well known. Many is not most, which is not an issue, but being known, however, does not correlate to being understood. What I mean is that just because many people know of a certain subject, and might even have interest in it, does not guarantee within those individuals in-depth understanding of that subject. There are plenty of examples of this phenomenon, but more relevantly, I mean to say that just because the word self-awareness is not an unusual word to hear, does not mean that it is at equal lengths not misunderstood. Rather, despite the fact that many have given their best in writing on the subject, and many more have read through their works, well, there is no guarantee that those who involve themselves with the subject of self-awareness can or even have the capacity to properly define the concept and the nature of the concept. Again, this goes for both writer and reader. I do not mean to say that all readers cannot understand the nature of the concept because they always lack the capacity to do so, nor do I say that the writers themselves have always misrepresented the true scope of the subject. Only that knowing does not equate to understanding. I bring this up because certain behaviors have come to my attention. I think I'll talk about each behavior I've noticed one by one during the course of this thing. It might be a bit disorganized, but please bear with me. It may seem like a terribly self-aware thing today to say that you are, in fact, self-aware, or that you're looking for it, in both yourself and in others. I would like to make it clear, however, that one does not need to outright say that they are self-aware to proclaim self-awareness. Any instance in which one labels oneself with identifiers. For instance, I am an explorer, an optimist, a learner. I am curious, self-conscious, pessimistic. The use of any of these sorts of self-applied identifiers suggests to those looking from outside in that the person in question knows themselves well enough to be able to use self-identifiers. The same goes for those who are open to and, you could say, comfortable with describing themselves in detail. Maybe it's people who say things like, "I know what I want in a relationship," or "I think I was acting appropriately." It implies so-called self-awareness. Whether or not these self-descriptions are made in earnest, whether or not the people using them are, in fact, self-aware, well, I don't know for certain. This phenomenon does not only manifest in the literal and physically tangible forms of self-representation. Your own personal experiences with it may also be a gut feeling that you get from others around you. The way people act, the words they speak, the thoughts and opinions they give you, that people have a degree of awareness of their self and thus believe that they are self-aware. With all of these things in mind, can you see a place that's a bit unclear? If we can put it one way, I'd like to ask, at what point does an individual become self-aware? This adjective, does it only describe two possibilities wherein the individual is or is not self-aware? Or is it more of a metric, self-awareness, so that one might ask, how self-aware are you? Both are on the table. Let's talk about the first one. I just get the feeling that many people would rather ask both others and their self about self-awareness using the former understanding. It's a much simpler thing to navigate, much easier to say yes or no, versus having to reflect for a moment or two on how much exactly one is familiar with one's self. People find the tiniest strands, the tiniest of indications that they are experiencing so-called self-awareness, and latch onto them so hard. These indicators and their definitions, they are formed from the masses. What I mean is that the definition of self-awareness, whatever it is, or rather, the common agreement on what it means to be self-aware. These things have gradually formed from input, digestion, and output by the masses. Although there very well may be definitions of self-awareness that are based on extensive research and consideration by professionals in the relevant fields, the power of perception triumphs all. It matters not what is, only what people perceive, or, rather, what they want to perceive. What is this mob-produced definition? It seems that being self-aware is regarded as a characteristic of both pleasure and pain. I am more self-aware than my peers, one claims, and so there is a sort of satisfaction that arises from believing that you are more in touch with your inner consciousness than others. Yet, at the same time, the state of being self-aware seems to be a cursed one. To know the self is to know all these uncomfortable things that lie within. One cyclical way of input, digestion, and output that the masses have produced as a way of coping with this is by joking. There are too many variations to count of the same basic formula, in which an individual connects some part of their everyday behavior to an aspect of their inner darkness. The humor makes this whole sort of self-indulgent affair acceptable not only for publishing, but also for dismissal. The shared pain found in the common everyday behavior legitimizes the validity of the joke because, if I can feel it too, must be true. At risk of sounding too vague and abstract, I reluctantly provide an example. I hesitate to use examples because, more often than not, they seem insufficient in demonstrating the full scope of things, yet here I am. I hope I chose well. It is all too easy, during moments of seeming existential crisis, to remember and quote the chorus of The Sound of Silence, a song that is apparently intended to be a warning against the inability of humans to truly understand one another. Hello, darkness, my old friend. The danger is that these forms of representation, of which jokes and songs are included in, can be severely reductive, either through execution, intent, perception, or a combination of these things. Reduction through execution and intent is merely that. Simon and Garfunkel, through writing and performing the song's lyrics and music, might have reduced or befuddled the true extent of the nature of the difficulty in human communication. It matters not their sincerity or honesty. Those things don't absolve you. They addressed the severely visible and basic symptom of consumerism and its effect on human communication in their lyrics. All the more ironic that the song is yet another avenue towards consumption, and thus escapism. Reduction through perception lies on the back of execution and intent. The onus is now on the listener. The distorted message is clear that consumerism leads to difficulty in communication, and yet the chorus gives another red herring. Hello darkness, my old friend. I bring this up again, because with these few words, we find the most significant conflation of meaning. I think you know what I'm getting at. Follow this once more. Consumerism is the cause for difficulty in communication, which is then the basis for this darkness within us. Thus, we understand consumerism to be the cause of conflict, suffering, and emptiness. By acknowledging this, we become self-aware. Hello darkness, my old friend. This isn't the case, and yet it is for many people. When one says the words, hello darkness, my old friend, they are doing two things at once. Simplifying a moment of potential introspection into one of humorous dismissal, and misidentifying the root cause of their conflict, suffering, or emptiness. That others would do the same, and readily so, the basis on which these sorts of words become memes, only further enforces this twisted perception. So comes a distorted view of self-awareness. It's apparently enough to recognize very basic symptoms of your escapist and defensive behavior, sprinkle some humor, and leave it at that. A collective laugh, and then we are all so self-aware, and thus the threshold for being self-aware is lowered immensely. You might not even have to do any sort of introspection yourself. Someone else can do the thinking for you through various forms of media across various mediums. Someone else can give you both the questions and the answers you didn't know you had or needed. As long as you can touch upon and relate to these questions and answers for a split second, say when you're looking at these funny things, you've got it. You are self-aware. And the humor, again, turns this whole affair into one of dismissal. These moments that could remain with you, that could be on your mind, they leave you in an instant because you think that any uncertainties with them have already been resolved, or because they're too funny to think about. Now, that's just one way in which the masses have been collectively forming their collectively formed perception of what it means to be self-aware. There are other ones, though. Consumption and indulgence have always been avenues towards escapism and away from earnest introspection. This is no secret. I would hope that you, I, and most people we know are vaguely aware of this state of things. Just let someone else do the thinking for you. Just because you know the answer, however, does not mean that the problem or the question goes away. You might know that your obsession with consumption, purchasing useless things, tending to the gardens of your outer image, investing superficial emotions into your favorite brands, you might know that all of these things are distractions. Art, often regarded as outside of this flow, is, I believe, not excluded. Art is distraction that you've created for yourself to consume, shying away from earnest introspection while you make half-hearted attempts at expressing your conflict, suffering, and emptiness without any sort of resolution. You feel it acceptable to do so, because society agrees that art is, in fact, a very valid way of expressing thoughts and feelings, and doing so is something that's brave, genuine, real? I don't know. Seems to me you're running away. This kind of analysis and conclusion is, again, not new nor unknown. But then I wonder, why don't you stop? Why don't people stop? Why don't I stop? The struggle towards becoming self-aware is itself a journey towards preserving the status quo. All these things that people consume in the name of growth, books, videos, lectures, the ideas, thoughts, and feelings contained in these things might very well be genuine and so-called correct, but it would all be for naught if the initial motivation for consuming these things is tainted. Just as that naive world traveler seeks to experience growth and self-actualization through unfamiliar cultures and sights, the person who desires to become self-aware has already gone down the most ineffective path. The individual, or really, the many individuals in question, already have in mind a destination that they know exists, and thus have pointed their feet in that direction. I wonder, however, this destination of self-awareness is a vision conjured up by an individual who has already determined that they are not self-aware. I wonder, how do you already know that this is a place you want to go? Why do you already know? Did you see it in a moment of great revelation? So many videos and lectures online about self-awareness, and so many people seem to have differing thoughts concerning the subject. The best way to approach becoming more self-aware, advantages in being self-aware, which 20th century authors had got it right, and which we should all read more of and agree with without question. So many differing thoughts and opinions, and many, if not most, of these individuals seem to have got it in their heads that their words are the most correct. Here's a great quote by this psychologist, one person says, and there they go, analyzing, sentence by sentence, passages which seem to provide enlightenment and salvation. I wonder, so many different ways of approaching the same subject. Really, how do you know that you're the most correct, with the most correct methodology, out of all of these thousands of individuals doing the same thing? Why is that author, the one you subscribe to the most, the one who got it? How do you know that you've got it, and that you've gotten it to the point where you now carry enough heft to tell others where and how high to jump? Ever stop and think sometimes, is this really in earnest and with genuine intention? Am I not just using these various platforms as a way of inducting others into my escapism? Can I just let someone else, in this case a long-dead writer, do the thinking for me? Does this not resemble religious pedagogy and dogma? I'd like to deviate for a bit and talk about the reliance of external authority in validating your personal claims regarding the nature of becoming more self-aware. The pointing out of logical fallacies is a done-to-death thing, and, if misused, itself a fallacious thing to do, but it seems still valuable to remind these hundreds of individuals quoting philosophers and psychologists that their words alone do not imbue you with power. I'm saying this just in case. Many never clarify the value in the words they quote. Why they're good words, correct words, right words, just words. Really, you might as well be saying nothing at all. The focus is always on what these sources are saying and how to follow the words the best you can. This is the case for many actions done in our world, and it seems to me always worth reminding people of this phenomenon, although many seem quick to remind me that this is an obvious phenomenon that is not worth reminding people of because it's a pessimistic outlook. And yet these same people still forget to take why into consideration. Just because you read a bunch of Plato does not mean, suddenly, that you become a purely negative force, deconstructing arguments not with your own positive statements, but with negative ones. You don't become someone who realizes that most, if not all, positive statements are unsubstantiated and that knowledge is useless. No. Again, knowledge does not mean understanding, or perhaps even more importantly in this case, integration. Back to the main topic. There is also danger to be had, of course, in subscribing to any discrete source, just as the labeling of individuals severely limits the scope of understanding of that individual's character and motivation, just as the pursuit of imitating non-vegan meals and veganism will perpetually constrain the possibilities of the cuisine. Holding singular sources with discrete perspectives in authoritative positions will severely limit the possibilities of your understanding of a given subject. The speaker and his audience are one and the same. People think that they're growing with each subsequent page read and minute watched of these sorts of motivational things. From what we might gather, hearing feedback and discussion among audiences suggest that many are seemingly satisfied with the amount of growth they're experiencing as they consume these forms of media. And yet, the only things these comments serve are the egos of the content creators and of the audience. I'd like to ask how exactly you know you're changing and growing at all. It's not enough to say, "I feel it after watching your enlightening videos. I feel more self-aware. I am more self-conscious now." If you see that many others seem to be closing in on self-actualization, then you might feel that your own salvation, too, must be inevitable. Collective feedback is simply further confirmation of the validity of the path you've all chosen. I only need to keep consuming these things and I will grow. Someday become self-aware. Yes, we're all in it together, and if anyone questions the flow of things, the way in which people recommend to you books they're reading, television programs they're watching, speakers they subscribe to with the words, "You should do this." Why do you think they do so? Do you really think that people are so nice as to recommend new things for your benefit? The things said before about individuals using feedback and discussion as confirmation of their choices, it's the same deal here. These people who recommend you things, they're seeking validation from you for their chosen forms of escapism. If you do indulge their suggestions, and if you do end up enjoying whatever things they wanted you to enjoy, not only do you further push them into the pit of conflict, suffering, and emptiness, you, too, have taken one step further towards that same place. You've converted to the religion of whatever thing they wanted you to consume. I would also like to point out, to those who take the position that religious beliefs are a personal thing that should be kept private, and take issue at those who express overt desire to induct more into their faiths, if you take issue with this sort of behavior, yet at the same time do the things described above, suggesting and recommending, there is a very large chance, I believe, that your behavior is fundamentally the same as those who you would disagree with. You may believe that you give out recommendations with an honest heart and a genuine desire to share so-called good material. Ask yourself, though, what makes you different from them? Why are they wrong and you absolved? It's also tiring. I talk with peers about these things, albeit in roundabout ways, not about being self-aware or self-awareness. Those subjects are done to death by those who would seek to coddle themselves and others. Rather, the nature of the subject of self-awareness and how people talk about it, and how people that think they're self-aware or on the way to becoming self-aware talk about it, it's tiring because there's always a wall. It is easy for us all to recognize where this wall comes from and what it is doing, but many, in an attempt to circumnavigate this wall, only build new ones. If I was going to start telling people what to do, it would become both the greatest irony in the world and the most counterproductive thing, I think. I don't know with complete confidence how I ended up where I am, and I don't know where I'm going. But I get the feeling that it's healthier to be here and not anticipate anything. Telling people to think for themselves is an ironic thing to do. Telling people not to listen to others, equally ironic. Both immensely ineffective and counterproductive to their inherent intent. I suppose some, if not many, if not most, may be doomed to what they are and how they will be, as dictated by the misfortune of their birth and circumstances. I would hope that my feelings are not so. It is, ultimately, not in the favor of those above to have too many individuals show restraint. The few who do, well, I'm sure some of you might have either been on the giving or the receiving end of these similar words. Why are you so serious? People ask. Lighten up. It's not worth it being so caught up in negativity. You're going to live life so bitter. I can acknowledge that there is a fair amount of conflict, suffering, and emptiness in my life, but I think the one thing I seek to avoid the most is that emptiness. That is to say, I believe that the conflict and suffering I have does not arise from actions taken in the hopes of stemming emptiness. I acknowledge that I only said a few minutes ago that avoiding emptiness usually results in it. I think my belief still stands. To avoid the acknowledgement of this emptiness and run away from things, escapism, that is what leads to conflict and suffering, these actions of inherent contradiction. No, the conflict and suffering I have is not an emptiness that arises from avoiding emptiness, or said in another way, an indeliberate and misguided search towards meaning. It is from a concentrated and deliberate search towards meaning. It involves other people who inflict pain onto and receive pain from me. It hurts, but all of it is from the heart. There are few who I have found true camaraderie with, but those few I cherish. I might not be close friends with all of them, but at the very least, our hearts opened up as much they could to each other with deliberate intent. There was no so-called opening up. That was, rather, a reaching out during moments of avoiding emptiness. These were hands reaching towards meaning. It was such a lonely and hopeless place to be, but just one connection is enough to tell you to hold out against the overwhelming weight of being an outcast. You might have wondered, or be wondering now, if what you are is truly wrong. To those of you still in the throes of crisis, I say, no. You are not alone. It might be hard to come across others you can find a place with, but they are out there. The inherent difficulty is that you, and people like you, are naturally not given to reaching out first, because the thoughts and feelings expressed when reaching out have been met with rejection of an empty sort. You've been shunned. If I am going to prescribe at all, I would say, take those rejections in stride and keep going, because if you don't, you might change into something unrecognizable, someone you hate. If these words do not resonate with you, well, that's a shame, but it's all right in the end. I only ask that you consider what the word open-minded really means to you. What is weird, and why do so many people attach a negative connotation to the word when saying and thinking it? Why do so many people seek to be different while shunning that which is perceived as not normal? Why are there so many contradictions? And those among you who believe they resonate with these words but actually don't? For those of you who have placed themselves into yet another sense of superiority and security, well, I think you'd agree that no one person is above learning another lesson. This is a never-ending struggle. To believe that you are, at the moment, safe is the most damning sign that you are, in fact, not